Thanks for coming. Okay, I guess I will just quickly start by introducing myself and then we'll go to our guest. So, yeah, my name is Andres. I'm going to moderate today, and yeah, I come from a background of doing computer music and electroacoustic music, and also, similar as Jonas, studied in sonology in The Hague. So, yeah, and I just do really still love researching experimental music. So it's a pleasure to keep on doing that with these two people. And also thanks to All on Radio and Outside In, Inside Out for putting it together. So, yeah, maybe we can just start by, like, maybe you would like to say some words about yourself, like your background, where do you come from, how did you, get to start doing your practice?
Should I start? Okay. I come from Slovakia, from Bratislava, and as mentioned, I studied at the Institute of Sonology. But after living in Netherlands, I decided to come back to Slovakia and start a label with a bigger perspective. I mean, the label started already then, but then it became a label that starts releases, physical releases, and over time it grew into this huge monster, because now LOM is like many different things. It's a label, but it's also like instrument manufacturing company. It's a community library. It's a community space. It's a mycological activities hub in Bratislava. So it grew into like almost like a corporation sort of thing. And personally, I perform with experimental music, and I do sound installations. And on the side, I'm also into mycology and lichenology.
Yeah, thanks. We will touch upon like all these topics in a bit. How about you, Seiji?
Thanks for coming, and thanks for inviting me. I'm Seiji Morimoto from Japan, Tokyo. I moved to Berlin 2002 in December, and since then I've been working. Before the moving, I already started to work as artist. From 1993 was my first performance, and now I'm working as an artist, performing and have exhibition with my sound video installations. And I'm organizing an experimentique concert series since 2017. And the next 2 weeks we have the 84th edition. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a long running thing. I mean, both of these initiatives as Experimentic and LOM are really interesting and have a long running history. But before maybe we get into that, I was just curious about the very early kind of developments of starting to do music or arts, because both of you are actually involved in also producing artistic output, not only in performance type of way. So yeah, how was your journey in the very early days?
I studied a classical guitar, as many children do, and then I ended up in a hardcore punk band, and I had a couple of years with that. When I was in my teenage years, I was touring with this band and enjoying life, and that led me to discovering like more extreme genres of music, and the places where hardcore bands were playing were also like hosting noise shows once in a while. So I discovered there's this thing where you can like really push the limits of what music can be and how it can behave, and that led me to like electroacoustic tradition and the music from the 60s and 70s, like the early beginnings of electronic music. And then I kind of like calmed down a little bit from the harsh noise years, and I started to really like experiment with sound, like really like what sound can mean, like what's the limit of where the sound becomes like truly enjoyable, and when it's just listening and when it's hearing. And then I entered the Institute of Sonology, and that's of course like broadly expanded the horizons of the experimentation, and put it also into certain boundaries, like the institutional boundaries of a school, which was good for me because I was, like 19 years old, and I was still like exploring, and it was good that there was like some structure there, doing homeworks and stuff. And so started with the classical guitar and ended up with like touching the boundaries.
Yeah. Okay. And Seiji, you have like a background also in musicology and music.
Yeah,
background.
when I was a child, I just painting. I was always painting, and I thought I will be artist. Even if I didn't know what artist is, but I thought I will be. I make something in the future too, and and when I was teenager, or no, when I was 10 years old, I listened a lot of music. Of course, it's pop music, Japanese pop music, and one day I heard YMO, the techno, no? And it was shock, and I wanted to make techno, or I wanted to have a keyboard, and and I didn't have it, but my sister had piano at home, and I just started try to play piano. And after that I bought my own synthesizer, Korg, and when I was 15 years old, like this. And I bought also MTR, so multi-track recorders with tape. You can record 4 tracks, and you can mix down, put the new line, and I start to make kind of ambient music. Yeah. Was the beginning. It was the beginning.
Yeah, it's like an interesting trajectory of kind of like confronting electronic music and then understanding that the means are not there, and then going back to kind of acoustic instruments, but then again pursuing that. I mean, it's quite interesting in relation to what you do now, I think. But
so the multi-track recorder was more as a machine for me as amazing. It was I was so fascinated. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have any like first encounters with some specific devices, Jonas? Like something like I don't know, in relation to guitar pedals, for example, things like that.
It just occurred to me that I also had a keyboard, and I have this weird memory that I had this Atari computer, which is probably way too old for most people to know, but it's like it was a very old computer, like before Mac and PC were so popular. And this platform, for some reason, the developers decided to put like MIDI in and out on the device, so you can like sequence synthesizers with it. And I remember my father brought me a floppy drive with some MIDI files of Offspring, the Offspring, you know, this band, like a punk rock band from US, and I played the MIDI files of Offspring songs through this Yamaha keyboard, and that was the first time I heard these songs, so I didn't know the originals. But so I had to run it through a sequencer on the Atari computer, and I saw the sequencer, and I started, sequence some of my own stuff, and I was maybe like 11 or 12, so like I started to just like realize that there is this whole world of like MIDI sequencing that I can experiment with, and it was also interesting that it only had one floppy drive, the computer, so you had to like put in a floppy with the software, load it, then eject the floppy drive, put in the floppy drive with the MIDI files, then load the file. So like, I feel very ancient when I'm describing this.
Yeah. Did you like listen also to the tracks, like to the recordings of this band afterwards? And did you like better your MIDI renditions or rather the original tracks?
It was funny. It how Burzum made this album in jail, where he recorded tracks on the basically also like some sort of keyboard. Like it had a similar vibe. It sounds like this medieval type of thing. So the Offspring sounded also medieval. It was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, actually, then in relation to that, I guess I skip a little bit further, but when it came to performing music live, your own music, for some of the first times, do you remember actually the first time you performed, let's say, your own music? It doesn't necessarily need to...
My own music?
Yeah, in front of a crowd.
Yeah, in front of the people was I was 20 years old like this, and it was John Cage's Cartridge Music. Yeah, it was. There was an event of John Cage's sound installation in Tokyo. It was 1993, and short before, in summer, he died. He passed away, and I was expected to see him, but couldn't. And I just went to the space where they organized the event, and wanted to help or work with the space, and and after that, one of the organizers invited me to play, and he taught me how can you make contact microphone. And he's the gallerist there, and he's also kind of mentor for me. And he is also very good sound artist, and Keitetsu Murai. And we played cartridge music. And it was for me the first performance. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How did it go?
Yeah, it was quite interesting to make a contact microphone and make a system with PA. I didn't know a lot about the old equipment, and I also learned the scores, transparent seats, and kind of graphic score. And yeah, I was already interested in John Cage, but have never played. And this practice to how can read it and can play it, it was so interesting for me. And I went to this I was more interested in playing there because I was studying musicology in a more reading or the more academic way, but for me it was much interesting to play the practice.
Yeah.
And then when I went into their playing and making the music, my own music.
Yeah, I do remember also that the first time I made a contact mic myself, and I feel like it is quite an exciting moment for everyone who starts building their own devices in relation to like
it's so
improvised music or
simple,
electronic
easy,
music.
but it's amazing.
Yeah. Do you remember your first mic that you built?
First mic. There is actually a very important person in the audience who's the author of the. I don't want to point fingers. There is an author of a book called Handmade Electronic Music. Hopefully, I'm remembering the title right. And that's an extremely influential book on a lot of experimental music artists because it basically covers all the possible devices that you can start with. You know, there is a contact mic, there is an electromagnetic mic, there is a regular mic, there is a small synthesizer type of device. And it's like very user-friendly book that I highly recommend. And yeah, I remember that building your own instruments is like a really huge step for every musician because it like suddenly makes you extremely connected to what you are doing actually. Like that's why I ended up like now when I'm performing, most of the times I'm performing with my own sound system, which I built screw by screw, designed every little part of it because it's like I enjoy the process as a part of the performance is the preparation of the technology for the performance, and it also like gives you a great deal of control over what is going to happen, and not that I'm like some type of like control freak that needs to have everything under control, but it's just like you travel around the world, you play in all sorts of venues, and it's good that there is like this one reliable thing that you know that it will sound certain way and it will like behave certain way, and then of course the space reacts to the instrument and so on. But it feels like super interesting, and I feel like that's part of me, like being a instrument designer or like a builder. That's something like I enjoy as much maybe as making the sound. So it's very natural for me that instrument building is like a core part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's something like really curious about constructing devices yourself, specifically for performance purposes, that it's not like confronting some sort of alien entity, which is, for example, like a classical instrument that has a tradition and like a convention of how you need to play it, and then to try to make it sound, but you actually construct the instrument from the beginning, and so you get very familiar with its possibilities.
Yeah, but you have to kind of also know what you want to do, because when you don't, it's very can be really frustrating. And for example, I used to be really into modular synthesizers because like it's just fun, like you're interconnecting these functional modules. But more and more I was building my own modules, and more I was realizing it's just like I can do the same thing in 2 lines of code that is like this hundreds of euros of modules, and it's maybe not worth it. And so I switched like to Super Collider. But yeah, there is like there are parts where you are looking for inspiration, and then there are parts when you have like a very clear mission or vision or sonic vision. There is not like a good word for it, I guess. But yeah, so it's not like universal, but I think like it's definitely something every musician should try doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe it's like a little bit of a bolder question, but how did you both get to the point where you know what you want to do, like as musicians or as artists? Like maybe something like in the line of when you remember like a piece that you performed and you look back to it and you feel like that was kind of in line with what you wanted to do and it came out in the way how you wanted it to be?
Yeah, originally I wanted to be composer in classical context, like write score, but and I used to play piano, and I always practice, but one time I knew I'm not good at that, and yeah, when I played John Cage first time, I felt somehow free. I cannot explain it well, but I'm out. I'm not. I don't need to follow the scores always, or not. I don't care about mistake, kind of, yeah. I thought, okay, that I didn't know about this kind of music. Yeah.
But I think that's already a pretty good answer. What I found interesting that you mentioned in another interview is about when you encountered this situation where you can't be like you can't make a mistake when you're performing a piece, like as if it's notated down, and it gives this freedom, and maybe that's like the grounding feeling that comes when you sort of know that you're doing what you want to do.
Yeah. And so John Cage, it's not everything free. There is a structure, there is a rule. If you have to follow the rule, instruction. But same time, everything can happen. It's not following do re mi, and it was I felt very so I'm free, and it was first, and after that I started to study about John Cage, and at the same time start to make sound or music. How I can be free was always I still looking for this way.
Yeah, it's
a bit
long way.
difficult to explain, but I'm always want to be free.
Yeah. How is it for you, Jonas, in relation to like how deterministic or indeterministic do you work? Maybe there's probably like a whole lineage of like
there's multiple
whole history to it.
Yeah, there is a like I deal with sound in all on very different levels in parallel, and I also had this project where I did like a very precise drone pieces, slowly evolving oscillators, and it was also like algorithmically programmed. And with that project, that was the moment when I realized I want to be like a performer for life, because I realized that I am able to create a situation where we are like collectively sharing some very interesting moment together. At the time, I was living in Poland, and I was performing with this project in like different small venues, but also like it's like house parties. Like there was a party going on, and then there was like one dedicated room where I was performing for people that wanted to do something different than party. And well, there was like a program I designed in Open Frameworks which did like very slowly evolving this line graphics, and then I did like a super collider algorithmic composition that was playing, and all the compositions and the graphics were designed that they can last forever. They don't have like a starting and ending, because there's like many oscillators that are behaving certain way, but none of it was random. It was like predetermined how they will behave. And so there is a project that was extremely deterministic, but then, for example, with what I'm performing now, there is a lot of like randomness within the code. It's still a code, but there are parts that are unpredictable. And then recently I started to also utilize these external devices that I give to people in audience, and they have like 2 control knobs, so the audience can also like change how things sound by turning these knobs. So I give the power to the people a little.
Yeah, I think it's also something that, yeah, for example, personally came to me when I sort of first fully encountered the possibilities of, for example, doing computer music, that it gave me this freedom of, for example, extending time to something that I can't really apprehend. But then on the same time, actually, for example, I mean, in the same like School of Cage, we would write like very, very long pieces. So I find that there is like some overlap in these kind of like methods. It matters from where you go into that type of thinking, but I mean, you've both entered it through different places. Yeah, but besides like being practicing artists, there's like a big part of both of what you do in relation to actually organizational practices that, yeah, I find really interesting. I mean, Sergio has mentioned this Experimentic, and Jonas, you do like the LOM space these days in Bratislava. And yeah, maybe you can tell a little bit more about LOM space actually. And so it started in 2018, right? And grew, as you said, from like doing microphones in LOM.
Yeah, LOM was a label without space. It started as a net label, which is like you start a Bandcamp account, and that's like how you start a net label, and it's like super easy, and you don't think about anything. And then it grows, and then you realize you have to like work on these relationships with journalists and artists and stuff like that. And then you are starting to do physical releases, and things start to grow. And as I started to make the instruments, I started to look for like workshop space, because I was doing everything at this 1-room apartment. Like all the microphones were built on the desk, and it was a bit problematic. And then this workshop space was growing also. Like I was moving from like 9 square meters to 50 square meters. And then I was looking for a space that can also have like a public part where we can host stuff, because LOM was organizing already like outdoor festivals and workshops and stuff around the city. So like I was looking for something that has like a public thing that can be separated from the workshop. And we rented this former butcher shop like a Soviet era butcher shop with tiles, and it was abandoned for many years, but the smell remained. And so we spent a couple of months by just cleaning.
How did you get rid of the smell?
It's incredible because I maybe we should
Yeah,
we don't need to
that's
get
for
into the
another time.
details, but basically the smell travels and sticks to dust, and the dust takes it to places where you wouldn't expect the smell to be. Okay, so yeah, so it's a former butcher shop which has like these white tiles and this 80s Soviet era design. But surprisingly, when you fill it with people, the acoustics are quite good, and we do mainly like focused listening type of concerts where people are quiet. There is no bar, so there is no like external sound of noise that you need to like overpower. So sometimes there are concerts which are like fully acoustic, and it's fine. Like the audience is listening and is attentive. So we built a culture of focused listening, which was kind of missing in Bratislava because there's a lot of venues which do experimental music, but they have this problem that you need to like be louder than something in the space, which I really didn't like. And yeah, so it's also like, let's say, not a political reason, but there was a reason for having a venue where you don't serve alcohol directly to people because it creates a sort of a different vibe when people are sober. They are free to bring their own drugs, but like we are not the ones serving them, and it also, I think, like affects the way people are listening and behaving in the space. And we are sometimes serving like a really good coffee and tea instead. Which is something I learned in Norway. Like in Norway, I was at several venues and they had a guy with like super nice tea, and I realized like it completely changed the way people are behaving in the space and listening, and the focus is different.
Yeah. I mean, beer costs like 8 or 10 euros in Norway. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Okay,
to do that.
yeah, that's also a good reason.
But it's a good outcome of that. I mean, when we were doing events in relation to my friend Sist again in The Hague for Default, we were also talking a lot about creating this like not alcohol-based culture around listening and concert spaces. But yeah, but it's also a library these days, right?
Yeah, we have a community library where people can donate books. I like gave all my books there, and there's like when some artists are visiting and they happen to be also writers, they also like give us their books. And so, for example, David Rothenberg or Kristina Kubiš and these sort of people, they send us a bunch of books for the library, or when something new comes up, we write to the author like, yeah, send us a copy please for the library, and then the students or artists from the city come and can dig around, because these types of books like experimental music or philosophy of music, it's not so common to find in a regular bookstore or on a regular library, because it's like a so specialized topic. So I try to create like this alternative space for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder, both of these cases of Bratislava and Berlin, as in relation to starting a concert series or like maintaining a culture of experimental music, have very different like bases. So yeah, how was it for you, Sergej, to come to Berlin and kind of like be involved in the music processes here since 2003? Something like that?
2003. The first year, the 2003, I didn't have any shows. I just learned the German, English, German, and but yeah, I made slowly the connection with the local artists, and yeah, at that time, 2004, 2005 was a lot of empty spaces, and if you have any idea, it was very easy to have to do something. And even if we do next week something, or it's very flexible, and so I knew some guys had a shop and or spaces or cafe. It was possible to do something everywhere. And even if we didn't have money, and it's also tour money was so almost nothing. You know? After the concert, we had just few euro and some beers. But we were happy. Yeah. But it didn't work so long. You know?
Yeah, I actually think it's a very like meaningful conversation that I try to have with people these days in relation to any type of like economic models of how to even manage a space, because I mean Berlin, for example, is pretty centrally located in Europe, and there's a lot of people passing through, so it would make sense to like book a show in relation to a tour or something like that. And then there are places that are a little bit less obvious, like for example going to Bratislava. So there's like a lot of need to create that. And for example, where I come from Riga, that's so far away from any like path for any musicians to come around that it's become like a really big question how to even manage maintaining such communities. Because, for example, what we don't have a lot of the time is like a culture of paying like a donation at the door. So then, and you also can't like, you rarely get funding from the state. So what happens is that it's really hard to even do the bare minimum for the artists that come, you know, to give them a place where to sleep and buy some lunch. So yeah, what I really wonder about is, for example, how was this in Bratislava when you started LOM? Because it's also Eastern European reality. There's a lot of people who can pay like €5 max for an event, but they still really want to come, and it still feels meaningful to maintain it and to have people like passing through. So yeah, how are you maintaining it? How did it start and keeps on going?
So when we organized the outdoor festivals, it was like this in these abandoned places around the city, and there was no money involved. All the artists there played for free, and we organized it for free, and it was like beautiful.
0-0.
But it was all local artists, of course, but we still like managed to make something interesting. And then as like my friends from Synology were coming to play, we wanted to raise at least a little bit of money so they can like pay for the tickets to get to Bratislava and back and so on. And when we started the space, I actually asked my friend, who's a curator of another label called Mapa. You maybe know this label from Slovakia.
Jonas? No, it's
Jakub.
Jakub. Yeah.
Jakub, he's a good friend of mine, and he runs a beautiful label. And he was organizing concerts in Bratislava, like very interesting, in an interesting way, like in unusual places around the city. Really good curation. So I asked him to like if he would like to take over LOM Space as his permanent space where he can book stuff. And he also managed to write funding requests or like proposals for Ministry of Culture in Slovakia. And at that time, we had like a really good situation that we were able to get some money every year to be able to like pay the artists, pay Jakub, and pay a technician to take care of the stuff like the rent of the space, the speakers, and all the equipment. That was kind of like donation from LOM, and Jakub and this government funding was taking care of like the artist fee, so we can pay a good fee no matter how much people come. And it's also, the space is quite small. It can like accept 40 paying customers, which means you can do the math, like how much would the ticket have to cost to pay for like a decent fee for everyone and a hotel and everything. It would be totally insane. So so we were able to get the government funding, which was around, let's say, 12,000 euros per year, and we did like 20 events per year, so something like that. Yeah. And then last year, the situation in Slovakia like abruptly changed, and we have a new Ministry of Culture, which is very bad, and due to maybe also some political reasons, we didn't get funding, and it was like denied by this upper board that has like connections to the Ministry of Culture, and we are actually suing the not the government, but like this part of the government. Wow. And but not only us, but there's like many affected cultural institutions across Slovakia which were denied funding for like these absurd reasons. And because they specify these absurd reasons, we are actually able to sue them, because when they would just say like the quality of the program is not good enough, this would be like very subjective and hard to like attack. But since they did like some weird explanation, there's this lawyer guy who offered us like he thinks we have a case, and I don't think we'll get money, but it's good to like fight back because basically what they're doing, they're like moving money towards their friends and like more commercial projects. It's happening everywhere around Europe, so you probably heard this story.
Absolutely.
Before.
I mean, in Germany it's a big question as well. And that's why I'm still very happy that we can do events like these and to welcome you both. But I mean, kind of like going a little bit actually further, although this is a very interesting topic, but it's like it can go on for a long time. I do wonder a little bit about like this like difference of organizing a regular event series and festivals, because actually both of you are involved in doing this to some degree. For example, Experimentic happens like regularly, but like in relation to this label that you co-run, Emitter Micro. Yeah, that it's also a festival that's happening time by time, right? How does the organization of both these differ, and what do you enjoy in doing one or the other?
So Experimentic was not my idea at the beginning, and a friend of mine asked me. He and a friend of him, Nicholas Young and Harry Antolge, had got this idea to have the series at TIK, Theater im Kino in the Riga Strasse. There is a very nice theater. It's originally for theater and not for music, but there is a very acoustic, also well equipment and lighting system, everything good. And they had this idea, but they had not contact with the Hitotsukai music scene. They were active 90s as a musicians, and they improvised, and they had also a space. But somehow they stopped, and they didn't have any contact with the musician. And they asked me if I know somebody to create. And I said, okay, I tried. And I wanted to help them, and we just started, and was at the beginning was just fun, and only drumming, but after a few concerts, after 1 year, I thought it would be very important for the music scene, also for me, and because the atmosphere of the venue was very good, and all musicians were so happy, and I take care for all, and everybody were happy, and okay, then I wanted to make this job for my job, and otherwise I cannot continue though after 3 years without any money. I was a kind of volunteer. I paid everything for musicians, and some part, 20% for venue, but I was always volunteer, and I wanted to continue this, and but I was kind of exhausted. And I tried to get the funding, and after second try, I got it finally. Then came COVID, and okay, but so everywhere closed and lockdown, and during the lockdown we couldn't anything. But after that, we all venues were closed, but we wanted to continue the series, and we made a streaming team, video streaming, and we invited only maximum two musicians, and 3 technical in this room, only 5. It was strict, but we continued every month streaming, and it was very important for the scene, or for me, and we met some friends every time. Only 5 people there, but it was so important to regularly to have this event and continue, and continuity, and
it's still really impressive to see like the initiatives that survived actually the COVID, specifically in relation to music, because so many things had to shut down because you just couldn't get it.
Yeah, but I feel like I also valued anything that was happening during the lockdown online. I feel like I was way more appreciating anything that happened, and I remember like there were these radio shows suddenly appearing of friends just like calling each other and streaming the talking, and it felt like we are missing this human touch. And then were these like virtual festivals happening. I remember visiting a couple we also had in Bratislava. One festival became like virtual for that year, and then there was a festival in, I think it was like a Dutch initiative, where you were kind of in this game.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, so we were like walking around this dungeon, and there was music playing, and like it was like a lot of like initiatives which were kind of innovative in a way, appeared during that time. So I felt like it allows new things to emerge at the same time.
Some things that I found that it could be really interesting to touch upon still before the performances is one actually that is in relation to kind of both of your interest in relation to the natural world, actually, because Seiji, you worked as a gardener also in Japan, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I wonder how has this experience, like, has it somehow contributed also to your musical practice? Because there's like a lot of titles of your works that somehow like relate to processes of in nature, like yeah, like Short Summer, Nocturne.
I'm not sure if why I have some titles with nature. It's connected to my experience as gardener. But yeah, I was working as gardener for 5 years, around 5 years, and one day at the beginning I was working as artist and gardener, both. I thought it was it is so good, beautiful to be artist and the same time gardener, to work with our nature, but it was so hard, and I stopped at my activity as artist because the gardener, to be gardener, was so interesting. For me, at that time I was more interesting than art. And for example, if you cut the trees, you have to take care where is the south and the north, because more sun or less sun, and the branch grown up different. And the sunny side is faster and slower. So you have to think about, if you cut the tree, you have to always take care where the sunny, and you can see in 2-3 years if you did well or not. And it's so amazing. For me, it was so for a long time. One work will be completed, or you don't know if it will be good or not. And nature is everything. By chance, you cannot control. And it was so interesting, and as it connected to my work.
Yeah.
And I still have this experience. From this experience, I have still have my work. So it's had a big influence from my experience as gardener.
Yeah, I do find really interesting how, like, in your work, there's all these like really slow and subtle processes that you can experience in some sort of cycles that happen in certain, like, in plant life and in like the cycle of the sun, for example, and things like that. But what I do find also interesting in like your work, Jonas, that like let's say the natural world is, yeah, it's way more microscopic. There's like all these like tiny complex processes going on. So it's like a different view on it also, and a different influence. So yeah, I mean, there's, on your side, there's something interesting in relation to being like very involved also in writing and making communities around like mycology and lichenology, if I'm correct. Lichenology. Okay, perfect.
Kinology is the dog training.
When I tried to Google it, it constantly tried to like spell check that I'm actually searching for technology, but well, that's not it. Yeah, and also like this portal, the first portal in Slovakia for this study. So yeah, what's your involvement in that? And you came there later, like sort of like while doing music.
Yeah. But like Slovakia or Slovaks and many other Eastern European cultures are naturally mycophilic. That this is this division that was proposed by ethnomycologist Gordon Wasson, that there are nations that are mycophobic and mycophilic, and we belong into the mycophilic culture where people are not naturally scared and worried about mushrooms because, for example, in northern European cultures, mushrooms are connected to like evil spirits and demons and like this unpredictability and underworld. And with our culture, it was always like this beautiful extra thing that you can eat, and there was no negative connotations. So like 7 out of 10 Czechoslovaks go foraging at least once a year. It's like a very normal way to spend time in the summer and in the autumn to go foraging mushrooms. And I was always like interested in like researching new types of mushrooms and experimenting taste-wise, because I don't eat meat, and I feel like the mushrooms can offer like interesting gastronomical variety in terms of tastes and textures. And it's also like it has this element of a hunt, that you have to like know specifically where and when and know the season, and it's like very similar to like hunting animals in a sense. And you also feel this sort of rush when you like see finally the mushroom you're looking for. And from that I discovered that mushrooms are like way more complex than people realize, and probably this has ever since then it was also like greatly discussed publicly, like what the mushrooms mean for the ecosystems and what the mycorrhizal relationships means for the forest and for our civilization, that the mushrooms are actually like even more important than the plants in some cases. And I realized it's like very understudied part of nature, and those types of things fascinate me the same way with music. Like I'm interested in the like the outskirts of what music can be, and the same with studying the natural world. I'm interested in like what is understudied, and lichens are also like a natural development from that, because lichens are even a little more obscure, and people know even less about them than about mushrooms. And yeah, so I started this portal about lichens called Lišeník.sk, which means lichens in Slovak. And 3 weeks ago, I finished the first identification guide, like a printed identification guide for Slovak lichens that will be like available for people. And it's like a small book that I basically wrote for myself like 4 years ago. Like this is the book I wanted, and it wasn't there. So So it's not directly connected to my music in any way. Like I don't use mushrooms to make music. I don't. You've probably seen these videos of like people hooking up sensors to oyster mushroom, and it makes.
But there is this video online though of you playing this concert next to this mushroom sculpture in Slovakia.
Yeah, that's just like a very abstract mushroom sculpture from the Soviet era. So that's not very connected. But I didn't like. Maybe the reason why I became interested in mushroom and started to spend a lot of time in forest was also that I wanted to have something that is not connected to sound, like to have this contrasting thing in my life, because I work with sound all day every day, and it's nice to have something else also, and to explore, for example, photography. Like I started to do macro photography and microscopic photography, macro photography, and at this point there is no like direct correlation.
Yeah, I mean that's also interesting for Seiji, because you are involved in doing also photography and doing visual arts, and there is some like level of like gathering, but visually gathering objects, and like taking images of specific things around Berlin. For example, in relation to this project Sorrow, where you took photos of like these obsolete TVs. Yeah, maybe you can tell like a little bit more about how do you separate your photography practice from like your musical practice, or how? Yeah, can you tell a bit about that project?
For example, this is more about it's a picture, but I'm not professional photograph, and it's more about technology, all the technology. But I've grown up with the brown tube television, and I saw so many TVs on the street every day, and it was 2014. Before that, I saw that I didn't take care about that. But one day I realized that so many TVs and they disappeared. Someday will be disappeared totally. And I started to take pictures for somehow thank you for this old technology, and it's more about it's just a picture, but it was so easy to take with my smartphone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a reason why I didn't want it to make a picture series or professional way, but I just started to only for me. Yeah. And after a few years, I realized, over 500 pictures. Okay, maybe it makes sense to show that. This is, yeah.
Yeah. It's curious also in relation to, like, I guess both of your approaches on seeing urban space, because in Berlin it makes a lot of sense to take photos of these obsolete technology just being thrown out, and I mean many other considerably obsolete things by people who throw them out. But and Jonas, you've like published also a book in relation to this urban.
The venture with lichens started by doing a photo book about lichens growing in this one particular neighborhood of Bratislava, which is like this Soviet era concrete panel house buildings, and everything was made from concrete and was very gray, and people were considering this like very depressive neighborhood. But when you look closer at this concrete, it's very colorful because it's covered with many species of lichens, which have all sorts of colors and shapes. You just need to like shift your scale a little bit to a different level. And when you take macro photographs of these structures, you realize it's like beautiful stuff going on. So I was going around the neighborhood with a good camera and taking like very detailed pictures, and it's now a sold out book of Petržalka's lichens, but you can download it for free on the website, so you can check out the photos there.
Okay. All right, I'm again going to jump because we're gonna soon get to like some questions from audience, but something that I personally just wanted to kind of ask you both is your relationship with working with outdoor spaces and like working with sound in like non-conventional settings. And it's a very big topic, specifically because in your case, Jonas, you construct all these variety of these speaker systems, which have a evolution of it also, which is really interesting. And in Seju's case, you do really work a lot with like resonances and excitations that aren't necessarily amplified by like conventional PA systems. So yeah, how do you both like think when you like do a work for example, a conventional sound projection situation, like with like loudspeakers, and how do you go about creating work that you really want to be independent from this situation, from like a concert hall, let's say?
With PA and without PA?
Yeah.
For me, the PA with PA is electronics, and I make electronic music feedback system, and with pedals and the contact microphones, everything electronics. And until PA system, until speakers, is a whole system is for me is toy or a kind of creature, and I also play. For example, today I play some small sound without PA, and okay, of course I can take the sound by microphone and spread louder, but I want to have some acoustic sound, only acoustic, without any amplification. And it is with small audience, small space, and it depends on the situation.
Yeah.
And but I'm not interested to, for example, this piece to present in bigger space with PA system. This approach is for me different than my electronics pieces.
Yeah, I mean that's also, I think, just like a quick question about it. How you treat this type of practice in relation to recorded media, like when you do record releases. I mean, they're still going to afterwards be played through like headphones or a set of speakers. But what is like so special about this acoustic situation, this small situation? What do you get there that you don't get in a recording, for example?
Acoustic situation with for me is a small sound. To be careful, it's like for me is to microscope to show the small plankton or flowers, and I don't. I just they use the small. Can I say something? Look into as I don't need to big projection with the camera, and the big projection is different, the attitude, and for example, maybe later we can be close to this small performance.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite different, the situation and the attitude, or
Yeah,
and also audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like also a psychological aspect of listening, that you're you're so close to it that once you start listening to it more, it becomes amplified in your listening process, that it's something that doesn't need this external part, but it needs time and needs focus, so it's like a totally different way of thinking about it. Yeah, but then how how has it been for you, Jonas, in relation to like performing music without these conventional situations? And I mean, something that probably like comes into my mind right away is like these works with horns, and then afterwards this new sculpture, like this kinetic sculpture that you perform these days with. What led you to that? Why do you want to do that?
I was just thinking that I can't even remember when I performed on regular speakers anymore. Like it's maybe more than 5 years or so. It's as I said, I think we talked about this previously, that I really appreciate the specific sound of certain DIY speakers more. I used to perform with the horns, which are, of course, like designed for transmission of human voice. So they have like a very limited frequency range that is like optimized for certain frequencies and not so much for the others, but they are like extremely efficient in doing this one particular thing. Like you have a 20-watt horn and it's like extremely loud in those voice frequencies. And there's also like a nostalgic element for many people in Eastern Europe, maybe here as well. The horns are still being used for these public announcements at villages where they like play a little song and then they like tell you that there is a market on Sunday or there's a truck with fresh bread coming to the village or something like that. And it has like a deep nostalgic thing attached to it. And so I sourced these horns and I started to perform with them, and I started to make compositions specifically for their sound, which is, like warm, kind of like a nasal, and of course distorted a little. But when you do stuff specifically for a particular type of speaker, you can make it sound beautiful. And that's the thing I learned. Like I don't need a hi-fi speaker or like a extremely loud speaker. I just need to like be in harmony, conceptual harmony with the technology itself. And when that works, then it's perfect. Sometimes I also use like structures as speakers. I did like several performances where I used objects in the city as speakers. So I used these tactile transducers to turn the whole object into a speaker. And sometimes they were like huge. They were like 10, 15 meters high sculptures. And people were like leaning against them just to feel the sound. And so once I realized that there is this freedom of what speaker can be and how sounds can be emitted, then it's like I gave up on regular speakers, even though like what I'm gonna be playing today is gonna be played through a regular PA, which is quite unusual. But tonight I'm playing field recordings, so it makes sense for me to have like a acoustically relatively neutral system for that type of thing.
Yeah. See, and there they are, the speakers on the screen. When I was in Czech Republic, I also experienced this, and I found it really funny how they would like announce something like, "Oh, this person's selling eggs in this specific house," and so on. I found it really great, and we didn't have it in Latvia. But I really found it like a big characteristic of the soundscape in like Czech Republic, for example, where I heard it. Yeah. This is a bit of a bizarre question, but I wonder, do you remember like some of the last, like one of your last times where you specifically enjoyed some sort of a resonance or like an oscillation in your surroundings, like in, for example, an urban space, or maybe there's like a place in, for example, for UCG in Berlin, that you really find like special, or where you stand for a while in relation to like the acoustics or the resonance of the space. It can be, for example, I don't know, what comes into my mind is like that I always somehow endure like this oscillatory tension in like, it's not an elevator, but it's the escalator, like the moving stair. And I feel like, I don't, like, it's, by recording it, I'm not going to capture that sensation.
Yeah, specific place. I'm always enjoying the sound if the main door is open or there is a garage. Then I hear the sound when I go, just to go straight on the street. The sound reflection or resonance or echo, and it's changing always. And I feel like the form of the buildings, or sometimes it's very dead, sometimes very wet, dry and wet, and okay. If I hear some specific echo, there is garage, and to the deep downstairs, and I feel the space always. Only even if I just go through the street, but in my imagination is always like 3D printing.
This reminds me, I have a friend who's like visually impaired, and he told me there is a book by a guy who's like completely unable to see, and he wrote a book about like training echolocation and how to actually recognize structures in space just by listening. And apparently this person learned how to ride a bicycle.
Wow.
Without eyesight. And sounds incredible. I haven't seen it, but this is what he claims. But apparently there are some like set of exercises that when you like practice enough, you're able to like train this sense of space hearing very well. And it's extremely fascinating. We want to translate it into Slovak language and release it at LOM, just for also field recordists, because I feel like we share a lot of same interests. Like we want to be more attentive to the space and understand it better. And I was thinking about the favorite resonance that you mentioned, and yeah, it happens all the time that it's just like I do the same thing. I do also listening to the wall when you're walking down the street and you're trying to hear the structures and what's going on there. And I recently did a recording in Japan of slot machines. There is of course, it's like a huge phenomenon.
It's these famous ones that are also, I think Chris Markers had like films where he features these.
And of course, the situations when you're in the venue where there's like thousands of slot machines, there it's sort of depressing. But when there is like, for example, 50 of the machines which have the same type and they play the same type of sound, just controlled by the users, of course, but they have like the same sound set of effects and melodies, they create like a very harmonious tone, which is beautiful. So out of these individual like very loud noise machines, you create one single beautiful structure, which was I was able to record, and that just like blew me away. how beautiful that can be, because the environment was really disturbing. It was like extremely loud. These machines are like concert level loud, I would say. Like like it's not normal. Like, and you see people that are like spending like thousands and thousands and just like smoking and like gambling the whole day, but then you hear this sound and it suddenly feels like maybe this is right somehow. I don't know. It just like made me feel very peaceful at that moment, even though the situation was very disturbing. And I'm planning to release this recording. Also, there's like several people which did like remixes of this one particular recording, so it will be all released together, and hopefully you will like it.
Well, I'm looking forward to listen to it. So I think now there's a little bit of space if someone wants to ask some questions, and then we will go to performance. Maybe like 2-3 questions, something pressing. That's unexpected. That's okay. I think it's a good time to witness some performance. Oh, okay. Alessia, please, do you want to take the microphone?
Yes, thank you for your talk. I actually have a question, more like for me, it's always interesting to observe when somebody is dedicated to activity or like sound that is like lasting for a long time. And I'm curious about like what, it's very abstract question, but what make you feel continue, or what you inspired after like doing it more than 10 years, more than 15 years? Like what actually give you energy to make another step? Is it a good question to ask?
Yeah, for example, the collaboration with the mission. I have a good partner, Eric. We just started the last year. It's always exciting, and otherwise, I always found something on the street. Yeah, not only TVs, but construction site and the sound bars in nature, and everywhere for me, everywhere the material or ideas or also motivation is on the street or in the nature in my daily life. And yeah, I'm never bored, never boring with this discover or observation of the everything. Maybe it is the answer. I'm not sure, but I think so.
For me, like as I said, like I deal with sound on different levels every day, and part of like, for example, it is like my livelihood. Like I make my living by making microphones, so there's that part which is kind of like necessity for like survival. But then performing, I think there is the ability to share this moment with people where we collectively listen to something and we enjoy it together. Like I feel like that's so powerful, and it always like I'm still, even after like, I don't know, 15 years of performing, I'm still like very nervous before I perform. But when I start playing, it suddenly all makes sense, and it's all like now I understand again why I'm doing this, because it's just like incredible moment where I'm able to create a very like a supernatural situation in this regular world. That feels like feels like a superpower to perform.
Thank you. It feels like you both said the environment actually around you is really important,
Yeah.
but in very different answers, but it's still connected somehow.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Jonas and Seju. It was a pleasure. Thank you for coming.